I want to see God do something.
His name is Jesus, and he sets us free. And if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Thank you, Jesus.
Hi, I'm Jesse Campbell, student pastor at First Baptist Church Windermere. Parents and leaders, take these sermon and lesson prep videos, introduce young people to Jesus, apply the truths of God's word to their lives and for your context, teach them to love each other, and watch God's kingdom grow. Let's begin together.
There is reason for hope, and his name is Jesus. Amen? Amen. Look at this. Look at this out of Job chapter 40. Brace yourself like a man, God says. I will question you and you will answer me. Would you discredit my justice? Would you condemn me to justify yourself? Do you have an arm like God's, or can your voice thunder like his? Then adorn yourself with glory and splendor, clothe yourself in honor and majesty, unleash the fury of your wrath. Look at every proud man and bring him low. Look at every proud man and humble him. Crush the wicked where they stand, bury them in all their dust together, shroud their faces in the grave. Then I myself will admit to you that you, in your own right, in your own hand, can save yourself. In chapter 38, he speaks again to Job and his friends. He says, who is this who darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you will answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together, all the angels shouted for joy. Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness, when I fixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place, when I said, this far you may come and no farther, here is where your proud waves halt. Have you ever given orders to the morning or shown the dawn its place, that it might take the earth by the edges and shake the wicked out of it? The earth takes shape like clay under a seal. Its features stand out like those of a garment. The wicked are denied their light, and their upraised arm is broken. Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea, or walked the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been shown to you? Have you seen the gates of the shadow of death? Have you comprehended the vast expanses of the earth? Tell me if you know all this. God puts us in our place when he speaks to Job and his friends, and he shows just how little we know about the earth and how it was created. This came to bear on the most brilliant mind of our day, of our age, Albert Einstein, who had, though he was born of atheistic descent, come to a place of atheism in his ontology. And he was confronted with an uncomfortable discovery by Edwin Hubble, who observed by triangulating the position of our planet in juxtaposition with other galaxies, that other galaxies were moving away from us, that the universe is expanding. And he said, and I quote, this idea of an expanding universe irritates me. It irritated him because it spoke to a necessary beginning. He had kind of vaguely come to be comfortable with the idea that the universe all existed in its constant place, that the orbits of planets around their stars was unchanging, that the proximity of galaxies to one another was unchanging, and he called it the cosmological constant. He made this concept up in order to avoid, in his mind, confronting an initiator. With all respect to the intelligence of Einstein, who is far beyond my smartest day stretched to infinity, even immortal matter must have a creator in order to exist. Nonetheless, this is how he salved his conscience, is with the cosmological constant. He would later come back to say this was the biggest mistake of his career because of the discoveries of Hubble. Granted, it is difficult, by the way, to triangulate our position because you look at 3 different points in space and look at this really skinny triangle, and from there you can sort of tell a distance, but nonetheless our discovery showed us that the galaxy, that our universe was expanding. When he came face to face with this, he said, and I quote, I see now the necessity for a beginning and the presence of a superior reasoning power. My source is The Creator and the Cosmos by Hugh Ross. You see, Einstein became irritated when his theory of relativity, as applied by William de Sitter and applied to in light of the discoveries of Hubble, showed that it all had to begin somewhere. And so he arrived at deism, which is the belief in a creator, an initiator, but nothing more. And I say this is perhaps less respectful, but I say it nonetheless. He was surrounded by a bunch of pastors and ministers who just didn't know jack. And they could not adequately answer his questions of theodicy, the problem of evil, why bad things happen to good people. And so he stopped at deism. He was an ethnic Jew and somewhat of a deist. And he never went in, as far as we know, he never went into true Judaism. He never went into true Christianity. But he came face to face with God's rebuke in the book of Job. He came to see just how little it is that we really know at all. So tonight we're going to look at a few different things. We started off with philosophical proofs of God. We looked at the necessity for an initiator, otherwise we would not exist out of nothingness, ex nihilo. I told you about my nihilo box, right? Which is an empty box you can look at to see if any universes, or at least one measly planet, explodes into existence out of it. By the way, did you know that even if a planet explodes out of my nihilo box, it still will not have disproven the Bible or proven the Big Bang? This whole project's kind of pointless, isn't it? Anyway, we're going to look at the innate sense of order that exists on various scales, zooming in. We're going to start zoomed way out on the stellar scale, looking at planets, stars, and galaxies, and look at the order that exists there. And then we're going to look at our own planet and look at all the factors of order on our planet. Then we're going to look at ecosystems and life itself and look at the fossil record. We're going to zoom in even further than that and look at our own bodies and look at our cells and the molecules and the atoms and the quarks and everything. And we're going to look at every scale from the stellar scale to the subatomic scale. You're going to see incredible order. And I argue from probability tonight. I argue that intelligent design is more probable than coincidence on every scale of the observable universe. We start with the stellar scale, all right? This is the lambda cold dark matter theoretical model for the expansion of the universe over the course of 13.7 billion years. It is a timeline to be read from the bottom to the top, to say that the very bottom is the Big Bang, and then as you move up, you get closer to our current day and age where the universe is expanding. And the idea is that after the explosion, as matter hurled through the universe in a dense and ever-expanding fog, these two ideas, those are the lambda cold dark matter theory and the quintessence theory as adapted within the theory of relativity, formed these perfectly shaped spheres. Because where you have mass in space, you get gravity. And as gravity is surrounded by other pieces of matter, it sort of accrues it assimilates the matter around it. This is a really, really brief version of the lambda cold dark matter theory and the quintessence theory in accordance with the theory of relativity. The idea is that as matter hurled away from the epicenter of the Big Bang, the larger chunks assimilated around them other ideas of other substances, and these are how the planets formed. All right, take all the ingredients necessary for a universe and put them in a blender. You've just killed everything in the universe, but try it anyway. And then detonate it. Send it hurling off into space. Now just tell me right now, when you detonate something, does that detonation produce order at all? Okay. What if you come back to the detonation site 13.7 billion years later? Is the stuff that exploded more orderly now? It is not. It's just careening through space now farther from where it started. I submit to you that the innate sense of order that exists throughout the cosmos is far more likely attributed to intelligent design than it is interdependent coincidences. You either believe in intelligent design or you believe in order from chance. Do you understand that? You must believe in one of two things. You either believe that the universe was intelligently designed, or you believe that the order we see and observe within it came about through chance, came about through coincidence. Not just one singular coincidence, but a series of interdependent coincidences. You either believe in intelligent design or order from chance. And when we look at the beautiful layout of our universe with whirlpool galaxies and different types of galaxies all keeping a close proximity to or a safe proximity to one another as they expand and move outward, thinking on what would have looked like if we rewound the clock. And as we look at the perfect distance that even our own planet has from its sun, we see order. Now, granted, that's not to say that space is without chaos. There are explosions and there are collisions and things like that, and they're beautiful in and of themselves. But the order that exists on the stellar scale cannot be explained by interdependent coincidences. With respect to the scientists who devised these theories, the lambda cold dark matter theory and the quintessence theory adapted by the theory of relativity do not explain the order that exists on the stellar scale. All the miracles of the Bible combined are more likely, they're more probable than this, and that's just the stellar scale. Now let's think about this explosion as well. Let's think a little bit further into this, this explosion. Let's talk about the law of conservation of angular momentum. I've told you guys before about my cast net, right? How I take my net, it's got this big loop, and I spin it. And with centrifugal force, it spins. Everything spins the right direction. What would happen if what would it look like if I were to cast this net, throwing it counterclockwise, and suddenly it leaves my hands, and some of the parts of the net start going the wrong direction? This is physically impossible. According to the law of conservation of angular momentum, that is physically impossible. Now, if you think of the Big Bang as one big cast net throw, everything should be orbiting the exact same direction. If it all came from the same origin, it came from the same explosion, everything should be moving the exact same direction. This is the law of conservation of angular momentum. However, and it would only take one planet to disprove this, there are planets that orbit the wrong direction. These are called transiting planets. It would take only one transiting planet in accordance with the law of conservation of angular momentum to disprove what we know about the Big Bang Theory, but there are several transiting planets. We have observed, this is not speculation, we have observed it, we know it to be a fact. Venus and Uranus, possibly along with 6 moons in our own solar system, through the Hubble Space Telescope, that order in the wrong direction. Now you tell me, are these planets wrong, or is stellar evolution wrong? Silly planets, you're going the wrong way. Behave in accordance with our theory. Now let's talk about this as well. Let's zoom in a little bit further now, just to our planet, just to planet Earth itself. And let's talk about the habitability factors of planet Earth. Now I already know a common rebuttal. All right, I already know a common rebuttal. What's it called? Epistemic closure, I think it is. If subject S knows P and P entails Q, then S should know Q as well. Q is this. The obvious rebuttal that I anticipate is this. We'd be surprised to find ourselves on a planet we could not inhabit. Yes, what I'm arguing from, again, as I said in the beginning, though, is probability. And I argue to the atheist that it is improbable that any planet should ever exist that sustains life at all. And we look at all the planets that we ever observed, and all the planets that we can understand to be true from what we've seen in space, and the odds of there even existing a habitable planet at all are slim to none. You have to meet all these specific criteria in order for a planet to be able to sustain life. And then once you have all those factors, you're not even guaranteed there will be life on that planet. Now, the first 2 factors alone eliminate over 90-something% of all the planets in the universe, and they are this. For one thing, this planet must be within the galactic habitable zone. Within the disk-type shape of a galaxy, this planet must be within a solar system orbiting a star that is not too close to the center of the galaxy and not too far away at the edge of the galaxy. It must be within that galactic habitable zone. 2, it must be orbiting a G2 dwarf star in main sequence. Our sun is a G2 dwarf star. As massive as it is, it's considered a dwarf star. It's not really all that big. There are other suns, if you will, other stars out there that are way bigger. Now, not only should it be a G2 dwarf star, but it must be a G2 dwarf star in its main sequence, such as ours right now. What's considered the main sequence of its life. By the way, if you are skeptical of the Bible's accounts of the book of Revelation describing these apocalyptic endings to the world, even atheists must believe in an apocalypse as well, because G2 dwarf stars have finite lifespans, don't they? That means our sun will one day explode. That seems like a much more violent apocalypse than what God describes, which is a beautiful story of people being saved and God extending his grace. Now, these two factors, the galactic habitable zone and orbiting a main sequence G2 dwarf star, eliminate almost all the planets in the entire universe. But there are more factors necessary. It also must be protected by gas giant planets, right? Such as, we have a couple of gas giants in our solar system, right? What's the biggest one? Jupiter. All right, Jupiter has an immense gravitational field, and as it orbits around us, its gravitational field, Saturn has one as well, and it's able to pick out and take a lot of the interstellar meteors and things like that. This planet, in order for a planet to sustain life, it also must orbit within the circumstellar habitable zone. It can't be too close to the home star or too far away from the home star. If it's too close, we all look like Snooki. If it's too far, right? So it has to be just the right, all right? It's got to be a Goldilocks kind of planet in its proximity to the sun. Now, these two factors sort of coincide with one another: the circumstellar habitable zone and the correct mass of a planet. Okay, because the authors of this material, the original authors, which I got this from Lee Strobel's Case for a Creator, they argue that the planet has to be the correct mass. I don't know. I think that's sort of relative, because it actually is. This factor is relative a planet's distance from the home star, size of its moon, volume of its water, and size of its land masses. So I'll give it to them nonetheless, but understand that you could sustain life on a planet larger than ours or smaller than ours, but not significantly so. It also must be orbited by a large moon. Our moon has a great deal of influence over life on our planet. There are so many factors that the moon sustains, such as the tides and winds and things like that. All of these factors have immense influence over life on our planet. A planet, in order to be habitable, must have a magnetic field in order to deflect its sun's radiation. Our planet is one big magnet, right? We've got a north and our south pole, and that protects us from the sun's radiation. Also, it must have plate tectonics and volcanoes in order to accommodate internal thermal fluctuations and topographical shifts. It must be able to shift on the surface. It must be made up of plates that interact with one another. And you must have volcanoes that relieve pressure. Otherwise, when that pressure builds up, if all the Earth's surface were one solid plate, that plate would rupture and the Earth would pop like a balloon. So be grateful for our volcanoes. Now, of course, earthquakes don't do a whole lot for life, do they? And the tsunamis they form don't exactly do much for life. But it's much more habitable than a planet that does not have plate tectonics. It also must have an oxygen-rich atmosphere. It must have the proper ratio of liquid water to continents. It must be a terrestrial planet, right, to sustain life forms at least like ours. And it must have a moderate rate of rotation. If it spins too fast, all right? If it spins too slowly, vice versa, right? We don't sustain life. So just the sheer volume of interdependent coincidences that have to have happened in proper sequence in order for a planet to be able to sustain life over the perfect time span are incalculable, to the point that it's basically impossible that a planet could by chance come to sustain life and then after that actually have life upon it, and furthermore have life that has cognitive thoughts such as ours. The odds are simply inconceivable that such order would come about by chance. Now, interesting factoid. Did you know that we have never seen a star actually born? We've never seen a star born. Now, we see star nurseries, and they're beautiful. We see the substances that sometimes we see these substances that make up stars, and they're sort of swirling and things like that, and it's beautiful to see, but we've never actually watched one created. Rather, we see a star die every 30 years or so. Every 30 years or so, there's another supernova. Now, as we just continue on, let's zoom in further onto the biological scale. We've talked about the stellar scale, talked about the planetary scale. Now let's look under the biological scale. Once you have an orderly cosmos, you need an orderly planet. Once you have an orderly planet, you need life to exist on it at all. Once you have life at all, you must have an orderly sense of life, such as an ecosystem. And once you have that, you must zoom in and have sustainable life and even cognizance, thought, which hopefully we'll be able to get to tonight. Psalm 94, verses 8 and 9 evokes the fact that God formed the eyes and ears. Charles Darwin said in 1859 in his book, The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life, this is page 217, Darwin's own words, to suppose that the eye could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. Darwin himself conceded that the eye, it's absurd in the highest degree to think that the eye could have come about by evolutionary means. Now, and again in conjunction with epistemic closure, I already anticipate a rebuttal, and I've heard it before. It's that, yeah, but we'd see a lot better if we weren't looking through our blood vessels all the time. How many of you guys have ever seen little dots and squiggles sort of move across your field of vision, maybe as you look at the sky? Have you ever seen that? Those are your blood vessels moving around in your eyes, and evolutionists say that wasn't created. That's a terrible design for an eye. Which is dumb because mine see pretty well. I don't know. Now, here's the beautiful thing about that. God created us with these eyes that protect our eyes from ultraviolet light, protects us from being blinded by ultraviolet light. Now, yes, there are other species that have more advanced eyes. Atheists will use that argument and say, now consider the eyes of like an eagle or an owl whose blood vessels are behind the rest of the mechanics. And they'll say, look at that. That's a much more likely eye to have been designed. The truth is, those species need more advanced eyes. It doesn't suggest that the eye came about by chance at all. It just suggests that God gives each species an eye that meets that species' needs. It speaks instead to this large-scale design. Not only did he design the eye, he also designed the exact eye that every species would need. Now consider how the eye came about. This rebuttal does not at all explain how the eye may have come about by evolutionary means. The evolutionist, in theorizing how the eye came to exist, believes that at some point in biological history, a life form that had no eyes gave birth to a mutated offspring that had the beginnings of an eye, or an eye-like feature, or a set of peepers, They believe that, think about that, all of evolution really hinges upon mutated offspring, doesn't it? It depends upon mutated offspring that are more fit for survival. And that presupposes that two eyeless creatures gave birth to something with eyes. That is ridiculous. And I say that frankly, but it doesn't mean I disrespect the intelligence of people who believe in evolution. But that notion I do disrespect. That notion disrespects my intelligence, to think that two eyeless creatures could conceive an offspring that had eyes. And it's not just eyes, it's every sensory capacity, every sensory faculty that exists upon every living creature. Evolutionists must presuppose that ultimately every sense that exists was begotten by an ancestral creature that had none of them. That is absurd, and your common sense knows it. Not only did at some point some creature have a mutated offspring that was more fit for survival because it had an eye, that offspring survived, and that quality improved over time. And then that same offspring developed another sensory capacity, perhaps a nose. And then that sighted creature with the gift of smell also had another mutated offspring that had the sense of boom, the ability to hear. It gets increasingly absurd. That's only 3 senses. Although I do kind of think it's funny to imagine being the first creature to ever be able to hear. You guys hear that? You guys hear that? I hear things. I hear stuff. And they all just kind of look at you. They don't say anything because they don't have mouths yet. I'm sorry, that's how my imagination plays out. You see, not only do atheists believe in the spontaneous self-generation of all matter in the universe ex nihilo, they believe in the sequential development of all senses ex nihilo as well. And that is absurd. The retina of your eye is less than 1 square inch, yet it has over 137 million light-sensitive cells. That is beautiful order, and the law of entropy dictates that order descends into chaos, not the reverse, not that explosions and chaos beget order. It is the reverse, and this is the second of the 2 fundamental paradigmatic laws of physics, the law of thermodynamics, the law of increasing entropy. Let me tell you about a good friend of mine. His name is Richard Dawkins. Our friendship's one-sided. I write him letters sometimes, and he never answers them. But he's an atheistic author. And he wrote something very sweet. I think it was about me. I'd like to think he's been getting my letters, and he wrote something just for me. I don't know. He wrote this. You guys, it's so touching. It is absolutely safe to say that if you meet someone who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, insane, or wicked. Oh, Richard. He likes to joke. We go way back. Now let's talk about this evolution deal. Let's talk about this. Let's reverse a claim. Let's reverse sort of an axiom that's been used to try to make fools of Christians upon science itself. That is that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Evolution, as we've been talking about here, is an extraordinary claim. And guess what? It has virtually no evidence. The fossil record screams out against evolution. If evolution were true, what we would see is this tree of life that starts off with all the species we know that exist today, that at least have survived at this point in history. And as we sort of dig deeper, by the way, it doesn't necessarily mean that because you're underground, you're older than me. Anyway, as you dig deeper, you get fewer and fewer species until eventually you arrive at the progenitor species. That is not what the fossil record indicates. Do you want to know what happens when you dig into our fossil record? You go down, you hit a certain layer that is called the Cambrian layer. The nickname for this amongst anthropologists, amongst archaeologists, is the Cambrian explosion. Say Cambrian explosion. Yes. The Cambrian explosion is this massive mud layer that encompasses the land masses of the earth, and within the Cambrian layer is every single extant species in the history of mankind, along with some others that have since gone extinct. Now, we're going to talk more about fossils. We're going to talk more about this later, but we're going to talk about what those fossils really indicate in a little bit. But those fossils, to me, speak more to a flood than they do evolution. Evolution has a near dearth of evidence. If you go to the Smithsonian, you'll see on display a singular tooth. And next to that singular tooth, you'll see a female and a male human-like stage of evolutionary development sitting next to their cave watching DirecTV and hanging out. And this is crazy because all we have is this one singular tooth, and we have all these massive gaps in the fossil record for evolution. We have no transitionary species. All right, we have fossils of birds, and we have fossils of alligators, but we don't have any birdigators. You with me? And when it comes to the evolutionary history of man leading up to Homo sapiens as we exist today within evolutionary thought, we don't have anything that exists along the other way. We have some various shaped skulls. We have other pieces of primate skeleton that we've proven to be primates, but we've left them on display nonetheless. And then at one point in the Smithsonian, you have a singular tooth. They believe this belonged to like a Cro-Magnon man. And then from there, they derive this whole scene. They show him, all of him, and his, I guess, wife. I don't know if they believe marriage existed at that point, or if we made it for life or what. But think about this. This is not an exaggeration. This is exactly what this is conceptually. That is to take one of my teeth, and from that singular tooth, make a sculpture of me, ball cap and all. Seriously, these things are wearing clothes. And my wife. Can you tell what my wife looks like by pulling one of my teeth out? Oh, this guy I married well. It's absurd, but it's what's happening in the scientific record. It's what's there. We have a dearth of evidence. All right, the evidence is simply not in favor of evolution. We're contriving entire species. For example, Lucy is a nickname for this skeleton that we found. It was proven to be a primate skull, but it remains on display nonetheless. All right, and evolutionists object to what they perceive as a caricature of their beliefs when they're accused of believing in a planet full of balanced and interdependent life forms just happened. They respond, it didn't just happen, it took billions of years. In truth, whether you believe it happened over the course of billions of years or 4 seconds, you still, by default, believe that it happened. And that is absurd with respect to the intelligence of those who believe otherwise. It is absurd to believe that this sort of order happened, regardless of the timeline. Now, young Earth theory is disputed by evolutionists by pointing to fossilized trees whose internal rings and carbon-14 dating, although unreliable, date them as well over 10,000 years old. The clear flaw in this rebuttal is that it assumes the creationists believe that all life forms were brought into existence at their infant stages. Instead, we see in creation, God create 2 adult human beings, an entire species in their adult stages of life. Do evolutionists honestly believe that creationists imagine an earth filled entirely with saplings, calves and lambs and infants? No. Instead, God creates adult trees, adult animals, adult humans. In actuality, we believe that the earth was created just as the Bible describes it, with every species arriving on the scene exactly together. This is in conjunction with the fossil record, unlike evolution. The flood described in the Bible and is mimicked in other religious texts caused the extinction of the dinosaurs, and then man and dinosaur cohabitated for a time. Now, texts such as Job chapters 40 and 41 describe creatures like the behemoth and the leviathan that have very dinosaur-like features. Outside the Bible itself, archaeological discoveries suggest thus. There have been human footprints discovered alongside dinosaur footprints in limestone riverbeds. Now, you guys want to hear another quote from my friend Richard? He says this: there are alleged human bones in the Carboniferous coal deposits. If authenticated as human, these bones would blow the theory of evolution out of the water. This is Richard Dawkins in Free Inquiry, Volume 21, Number 4, issued October 11th, 2001. Show the next picture. This is clearly a human footprint, directly in the same deposit as a dinosaur footprint. All right, if you're watching this online, you can see this in the Faith and Reason notes. Show the next picture. This is the Paluxy footprints in the Taylor Trail. They show human footprints alongside dinosaur footprints. When they were first uncovered, one paleontologist who was a devout atheist and evolutionist turned away and refused to look at the scene. His colleagues pled him to turn and look at the evidence, but he said that if I never look at it, I can act as though I've never seen it. And in his mind, this was his way of being able to deny ever having seen this proof of evolution. Imagine the scene as they uncovered this limestone riverbed. They were pleading with him, please just look at it. Please just turn around. And he stood there stubbornly with his back to it and says, if I never look, I'll never have to deny evolution. On August 12th, 1989, Dr. Don Patton spoke at a conference in Dayton, Tennessee about the Riles Track and the Paluxy River, which provides compelling evidence that man and dinosaur may have existed together at some point in history. 2 well-known evolutionists were present and conspicuously disturbed by the presentation. The next morning, they both flew to Dallas, traveled immediately to the Paluxy River. Later that day, the tracks were found to have been completely destroyed. In the face of scientific evidence that's contrary to evolution, evolutionists act in a way that is ironically unscientific. And rather than following the evidence wherever it leads, they destroy the evidence that counters their presuppositions. Now, to be fair, the human tracks on the Taylor Trail seem to have changed shape in bizarre ways through erosion since we've exposed them. They've been exposed to the elements and rain and things like that. And now, like, some of the toes are disappearing from it, and they're weird. They're looking differently now. They don't look as compelling as they used to. But I would submit to you, we should evaluate them on what they looked like when we originally exposed them, not on what they look like now after years of wind and erosion and sunlight and rain. Look at the next image. Now, we talked briefly about the theory of hyperbarics and the idea that the reason mankind lived longer and existed in a larger state in biblical history is because the earth was encased in water before the flood. This footprint would coincide with that. Furthermore, there's something else to know about this. At this point, we begin to sort of critique the multi-million-year timeline necessary for evolution. And this footprint is actually in granite. And granite is a substance that is supposedly 1 billion years old, according to evolution. And it's if this granite supposedly formed 1 billion years old, and it was formed according to evolutionary theory millions of years before man evolved, yet there is a human footprint inside granite. Silly footprint. Stop lying. Now look at the next photo. Look at this. This is the inside of the thigh bone, if you will, kind of like our femur of a Tyrannosaurus rex. Dr. Mary Schweitzer of the Montana State University made this startling discovery. And it's not only is it not fossil, you guys know what fossil material is? All right, it's when all the biological matter sort of biodegrades and it gets filled in with sediment and becomes hard. At least that's one of the ways that fossilization works. This is different. This is actual tissue. This is actual Tyrannosaurus rex tissue. It's bone tissue complete with red blood cells. This was found in 2002. It could not possibly then be 68 million years old, as originally theorized. Now, Dr. Sean Pittman, if you're watching this online, Dr. Sean Pittman has a really exhaustive examination of this very work, and there's a link available in the notes called Faith and Reason on my website, jessethatcampbell.com. But when she found this obvious, like, red blood cell tissue inside the bone of a Tyrannosaurus rex, she said, and this is the understatement of the century, said, well, I guess that they're not as old as we thought they were. Yeah, no kidding. No kidding they're not as old as you thought they were. All right, they're not 68 million years old. Now, this one, check out this next one. And what is that? What is that a picture of? Just say it. Yeah, a Stegosaurus, a dinosaur. Get this. This carving is 500 years older than the whole field of archaeology itself. How is that possible? It suggests that man might have seen dinosaurs. Now, Jesse, are you saying with absolute conviction that man walked with dinosaurs? I don't know, but I definitely know this disproves the timeline for evolution. What I'm pointing out here, and this is not a hill I'm going to die on. I'm not going to try to sit here and convince you that man walked with dinosaurs, because honestly, that's not completely pertinent to my case. The case that I'm making is the earth could not possibly be billions of years old, which is necessary for evolution. When you say to an atheist or an evolutionist, how do you believe all of this just happened? They'll say, it didn't just happen. It took billions of years. Guess what? You don't have billions of years to work with if you rewind the clock. And basic arithmetic proves that. Here are some basic ways in which simple arithmetic disproves the necessary multi-billion-year timeline for evolution. The force of attraction between two objects is inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. This is called the inverse square law. The distance is reduced to 1/3 its current state, and then the force of attraction between the two objects becomes 9 times greater. Take, for example, our own Earth and our moon. According to the inverse square law, the moon moves 3 inches away every year. It moves away from us 3 inches every year. Come back. Now, if you apply the inverse square law, 1.2 billion years ago, the Earth would have been orbiting around the Earth just above the surface. This is taking simple arithmetic, 3 inches a year multiplied by 1.2 billion years, puts the Earth right about here, which would explain what happened to the dinosaurs. Poof. Here comes the moon. Poof. It'll be back in 20 minutes. We better be ready to duck again. All right, look at this as well. Just taking basic arithmetic from observable principles around our planet and solar system, simple arithmetic proves that the universe could not possibly be billions of years old. Saturn's rings are gradually leaving the planet's gravitational field. They would have collided with Earth if the solar system were billions of years old by now. The Earth gradually is slowing in its rotation. If it's slowing in its rotation, that it means that it was faster at one point in time. If you rewind the clock billions of years, it would have been moving so fast that it would have produced heat like that of a star, killing all life and destroying the planet itself. Can you imagine? See, my imagination always takes these things and applies them in the world of evolution. I imagine all of us like clinging to the grass while the Earth spins way faster. Woo! That's just my imagination of life on Earth billions of years ago. All right, the Earth is moving away from the sun a little every year. Now rewind the clock billions of years. Not only the Earth, but every other planet in our solar system It's moving away from the earth a little bit every year. Rewind the clock billions of years, and the earth and the sun are snuggling, and the sun is just a little bit of a smother, you know what I mean? It kind of burns all life. Like it would completely destroy the earth because it was so close. If you rewind the clock billions of years, the earth could not be billions of years old, because as it moves away from the sun, rewinding the clock billions of years puts the earth right smack on the sun. There should be several hundred million supernovas by this time, but we have seen fewer than 300 of them. Think about it. If the universe existed for billions of years, and if we see a supernova every 30 years, that means that there should be hundreds of millions of supernovas. But there are fewer than 300. So, are the stars incorrect? Or is the billion-year timeline for evolution incorrect? Jupiter's moon, Ganymede, has a strong magnetic field. It's hot and molten. Therefore, it could not possibly be billions of years old. Granite has a short half-life, meaning it could not possibly have ever been hot and molten, as evolutionary theory requires. So this multi-billion-year timeline is the best thing that evolution has going for it, and it's not possible using basic arithmetic on observable, proven facts throughout our solar system and on our Earth. Now let's talk briefly about fossils. Continue on with this idea of the fossil record, and just speaking to the implausibility of evolution. All right, look at this next photo. This is a fossilized plant. What happens to a plant when you remove a branch like that from its trunk? What do the leaves do? Very quickly, in fact, what do they do? Yeah, they die, they wither, they shrink. Eventually, the whole thing just disintegrates. So the fact that these are fully, extended leaves, like a plant that's connected to has been just immediately removed from its source and is even absorbing sunlight right here, it suggests that it was suddenly taken over by quicksand or tar or something like that. That's where we get a lot of our fossils from, is from creatures that wandered into quicksand or tar pits or something like that. Plants don't wander into quicksand, right? I'm a stupid plant. I took a wrong turn. Tar pit. No, plants don't just wander into tar pits. Instead, you know what the only thing that could cause a fossilized plant? A flood. Now get this. Most of our fossils are plants. Does this mean that most plants are poor navigators and make poor navigational choices and walk into sand pits and things like that? Or does it mean that all of this fossil evidence of plant matter, fossilized plant matter around the earth, is the result of a flood? I postulate the flood because it's simply more plausible. It's simply more plausible. Now, look at this next one. This is it's typical of a lot of fossils that we see, because you have animals that are sort of caught off guard. Now, this is either a fish that was caught off guard by a mid-meal, in fact, as you can see, by a sudden rush of sediment or water of an improper salinity into his habitat, brought on by a flood, or the recession of flood waters, or he just choked. I don't know, one of the two. But it does bring us to sort of speak about the nature of fossils and how they're made at all, and how they even come to exist at all. Because you see, when something dies, I mean, it just disappears from the surface of the earth unless we bury it. For example, I was chased by a possum last night. Yes, I was running, and I guess I got too close to Mama Possum's babies, and she started coming out and like all cursing at me in possum language. And I was like, what? This possum, I hope, is going to die. Why? Because she was mean. So what happens when this possum dies? When this possum dies, for one thing, it makes my running trail smell awesome for a while, doesn't it, right? And then the biodegradation process takes over, and insects and critters all come to the buffet, okay? And then you're sort of left with bones, and those bones kind of scatter. And some of them, even like if they're cartilaginous, especially, will just completely disintegrate. Some of the bones disintegrate. The bones are scattered from the scene as well. You don't ever, like, if you see this possum die, you come back long enough after the fact, there's not going to be any sign that thing ever even existed. But fossilized animals with complete skeletons are something different. Animals become fossilized because they are encased in mud. They're encased and their bones remain as they leave this sort of hollow structure to encase sediment that becomes like a rock. And when we look at the postures of animals caught off guard throughout the fossil record, it really speaks more to a flood. Within the Cambrian layer, there's even another sort of strata, an order suggested. At the bottom of the Cambrian layer, you have sea creatures, clams, things like that. Above that, you have walking creatures. And at the top layer of the Cambrian explosion, what type of animals do you think you might find there? We've got sea creatures, we've got land animals. What's left? Birds. That's right, birds. Now, evolutionists say this, aha! These clams got it on and made this alligator. And then this alligator is the ancestor to this bird. No, my friends. It's that the sea creatures were already underwater when the flood came, followed by the land-dwelling creatures, and then Birdie's wings got tired. It's the flood. It's the flood. This Cambrian explosion, this Cambrian layer, and even the order within it all screams flood. It all screams out to a flood. And this flood is described in the Bible, and it's even comes up in other sacred texts. You see it in other sacred texts as well. Now, floods make fossils, and a massive flood would make an abundant fossil layer like the Cambrian layer. Furthermore, the flood would explain the surprised posture of fossilized animals and do so more adequately than the hackneyed and vague meteoric extinction theory, meteorite theory. You see all these animals that are sort of caught off guard as though they've been washed away in a flood, as though they've been hit by either a wave or caught by rising waters. These bones are all in this sort of surprised structure. And a flood around the earth is the only thing that would explain that. Furthermore, the overabundance of fossilized plant matter. So we've looked at the stellar scale and the planetary scale and now the biological scale. Let's zoom in even further. Let's talk briefly now about the order that exists on the cellular, molecular, and atomic scales. The more you zoom in on life, the more complex it gets. And when Darwin was working out his theories, we didn't know anything about cells. We did not have microscopes capable of observing cells. We thought of cells as nothing but little blobs of protoplasm. And then, the first time we ever observed a cell, we're like, holy order, Batman. Cells are brilliantly designed factories. I mean, you guys have studied the cell at this point. Otherwise, you go to a horrible school. But you guys have studied the cells, right? We have the cell wall, we have the endoplasmic reticulum, we have ribosomes. We have all these different pieces. That's just one singular cell, and this cell can replicate itself. This cell can repair itself. This is way beyond what Darwin ever conceived about cellular biology. And get this, there are trillions of cells in one singular organism. And so evolution, starting with the Big Bang Theory and applying all this, applying even the theories of the lambda cold dark matter and the quintessence theories adapted by relativity, supposes that as matter careened through the fog of the universe at the time, escaping from the Big Bang Theory, that around one singular mass was assimilated all the ingredients necessary for life. And let's just even grant the ungrantable. Let's commit a massive flaw in logic and say, okay, atheist, I will give you that. Okay, Big Bang theorist, I will give you that. Okay, evolutionist, I will grant you that. But even that does not explain how life began, because even if you do have all the pieces and parts necessary to create such amazing cellular order, you do not get cells. You do not get atoms. All right? Now, zoom in even further than that. All right? The eukaryotic cell is about 1/10 the size of the head of a pin, but it contains 3 billion units of genetic data to make it work. Such information could not come about by undirected causes. A microbiologist named Doug Axe said, this cell is a world that Darwin could never have imagined. It is a microscopic factory with 1 gigabyte of information in its molecules. For the simplest form of life to function, a minimum of 250 proteins is required. DNA sequences amino acids in a very specific order to produce proteins. The odds of such a sequence coming about by chance are 1 in 1 trillion, 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 trillion. This is from Ben Stein's Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. Again, design is simply far more plausible. Now, we have much more to talk about. We're going to have to break it up and wait until the next time we get together as we start moving into historic proofs of God. I'm going to show you fulfilled prophecy in the Bible. It's going to blow your mind. But as we close, I want us to, again, take the truths of this and apply it to our lives. You are not happenstance. The order that surrounds you and the order that comprises you is the result of loving design. And that designer is God. His son's name is Jesus, and he loves you. Let's pray. God, I thank you so much for my students, and I pray, Lord, that they would go from this place equipped with this knowledge. Lord, I pray that they would go with this and apply it to their hearts, knowing that they are not an accident, but they are a beautiful and beloved creation. There is reason for hope, and his name is Jesus. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Love you guys. I'll see you this weekend.
You found me.
Hey.